Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cool Crone. I'm here with Andre Carr, and today we've decided to talk about the whole sign house system. So, for all of you astrology nerds out there, this is your show, and welcome, Andre. Hi, how are you
Hi,
today?
hi there, and hi everyone.
So, we're going to jump right into the discussion. And the main thing that I want to know, I guess I'll reverse my order of questions, is whole sign houses really, in your opinion, is it like the best? Have you worked with other systems? And how do you kind of think about the other house systems? What's your experience with them?
Uh, well, it's always going to be a little bit subjective. I think it's the best, and I'm not alone. There are plenty of astrologers, both young and old, that use the whole sign system. I evolved into it because the first, I'm going to say about 6, 7 years, I used Placidus mostly, and then a little bit of the koch system with KOCH, which is fairly similar to Placidus. And then there are other quadrant systems, Regiomontanus, Campanus, topocentric. They all share the same idea in that the 10th house cusp, they say, is the midheaven, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And but then what I started to notice, what started to pull me away from these types of systems, had more to do initially with noticing that, particularly on the seventh cusp, like if you have a rising degree, then you have the seventh is on the other side, and it's the relationship house, the house of marriage. And I remember in the 80s doing consultations, and there would be a planet way down below the for example, say, imagine that it's 25 degrees or 27 degrees rising, so that's 27 degrees setting. And now imagine you have a planet at 5 degrees, so it's way below that line.
Hmm.
And I would be probing, this happened to me multiple times, for what was going on. And the health thing just didn't come up. It would be relationship, something to do with relationship. So then I thought, that's strange. So at first I toyed around a bit with equal house, because that was sort of like whole sign, but it still created boxes. And it was only when I switched to seeing the whole sign as the whole sign rises, the whole sign sets, and then if the planet is anywhere in that sign, it vibrates to that category, which would have been in that case relationships, right?
Right.
And from there, I noticed repeatedly that I got better and better results, when I was reading charts.
Hmm.
And the other reason too was that, for instance, when you look at the quadrant systems, the most popular out there probably continues to be Placidus. Is that true? Would you say?
I think that's true. Just because so many of the books started to get written, I think, in the 70s and 80s, and people were still predominantly using Placidus. So that's what they refer to.
Right. So Placidus is a system where what this monk in the Middle Ages worked out was that what he did is he took the degree rising, and then he calculated based on time how long does it take to get to the midheaven, and
Hmm.
he divided the time by three, and he got these 3 points, right?
Hmm.
And the thing is, one of the things I kept noticing is I couldn't get anything from the cusps. I would always think, okay, planet is going to go to the cusp, and now that house starts or enter. I couldn't really say this makes any sense to me. Whereas one of the things I noticed pretty early was that if I used equal house and I said, okay, well, now the cusps are the degrees of the ascendant all the way around the chart, that I got good results from, probably because it makes an angle to the ascendant. Any
Yeah.
number will connect to the ascendant. And it seems so much more accurate. So then that also fits into whole sign, because in whole sign, you have the whole sign being used, but the degrees are still the most powerful degrees of that sign, right? Instead of saying that's the entry to the house, you say that's the power point of the house. That's actually one of the key, I think, distinctions around whole sign, to focus a lot on the ascendant, and rather than the midheaven. Now, the other thing I'll tell you that makes the midheaven a very suspicious point, and this I discovered playing around with my computer, just how you start playing. Okay, I wonder what happens if I do this or that or the other thing. So if you take your chart, anybody's chart, and you pretend that you're born north or south of where you are. So you're born on a meridian, and you imagine, there are 8 billion people on the planet. So odds are that when someone is born, other people are born at the same time, north or south of them, right?
Yeah,
Some number of people. Well, it
absolutely.
turns out that every single person in that meridian has the same midheaven. Every person, even at the North Pole and the South Pole, exact same thing, right? Never
Okay.
mind that on the North Pole, you can't make a chart because the midheaven might be below the horizon. I mean, it
Yeah.
gets weird.
Yeah.
But the whole point is that immediately that midheaven has more of a group energy. Like, in a way, it's really powerful because it takes in the whole planet. The midheaven is the high point at the equator. When you draw your chart as though you were born at the equator, you get the midheaven kind of perpendicular. But where you're born, it could be tilted. So it goes to that other question you were asking about what happens when it's one side or the other of the.
Yeah.
So then, first of all, treat it as something on its own. When planets go through there, you'll get it will be connected to career. It's just that in the ninth, you do see, for example, themes of education, maybe publishing, ninth sign, right? Versus in the 11th, group energy, a more social house, and things like that.
Mhm.
But the main point is to say that the 10th sign will always vibrate to career, whether or not the midheaven goes through there. That
Yeah.
I've noticed repeatedly. And for instance, in a recent um, something in my life, going back now about 20 years, I remember Pluto at the zenith point, meaning 10th sign square the ascendant. Like in my case, they're very close together, right? So the difference meant about 3 years or 4 years in transit. But I noticed the Pluto at the zenith, at the square ascendant point, was actually the major career change. When it happened in a bigger way than when it crossed the actual midheaven. And then the final thing to say about this is that, if a person says, well, okay, so all of that may be true, but I will really like Placidus. I really like it. But I would maybe want to study the whole sign system. Well, all you do is, and when I say all, it may not be that easy depending on how you like to draw your charts. But one of the things you can do is still look at Placidus, but just put the numbers of the signs. So then you can do both at the same time. You can consider, does that feel to you more like whatever it is, or is it the other system, right? Now there are cases where you really see this pattern very clearly, and this is where people that use Placidus then will want to cheat and say, well, yeah, but it's pretty close to the ascendant, and so like a planet that's above the ascendant, right? By
Right.
this rule, that planet is in the 12th, right? So
Right.
then you get into the whole thing where you say that planet is weak because it's cadent and it's not going to produce as much. And also the person will hide it because it's 12 sign. Well, you have Trump's case where the Mars is 3 degrees above the ascendant. And you're going to have a hard time convincing me, even though you can say things like, yeah, he does some things behind the scenes, but that's explained elsewhere in his chart anyway. But he seems to wear his aggressive, vulgar nature. I think it's a pretty forward
Yeah.
expression.
Machismo almost. Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, there was something else too that I remember. When you're doing astrology years and years, you take everything into account. You have memories. Oh yeah, I remember that thing that I read. So people may be aware of this French guy. His name was Gacquelin.
Hmm.
He did all this work and around planets and trying to correlate them to professions. And he kept noticing that planets that were above the ascendant by some degrees tended to be more powerful than below the ascendant. Meaning, like, if your sun rises so that it's in the 12th,
Hmm.
apparently in the 12th, but really it's in the same sign,
Hmm.
it's more powerful. So then, for instance, Mars, like that, would be more likely to correlate with an athlete, and Jupiter with a politician, things like that. And the statistics were in favor of this, but he said, no, it's not when they're below, it's when they're above. So that's another tell, that the sign rising, and especially when it's above, it's more powerful than when it's below. I noticed that people that have the sun, for example, say that the ascendant is 20 degrees. If their sun is at 23, compare it to if it's at 17. The 17 is more powerful because it's above, it's already risen. So it carries the energy of the ascendant. Think of it as when you're born, it's a snapshot of the chart, right?
Mhm.
But really, your life is a film. I mean, the planets are moving, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then you get that snapshot. So it means that if your sun is at 17 and your ascendant is 20, it means about 12 minutes before your birth, roughly, the ascendant crossed the planet, right? So then, by the logic of what Gacklin was experiencing, it imprints to the psyche, and
Mm.
that person has a stronger solar force. This can really drive people nuts because they look at a chart and they see that it's a static picture, but they don't remember that things are constantly moving. So I get a lot in astrology from visualizing where a planet's going, where were they before and where are they going next.
Mhm.
And it's important to keep that in mind, which is what then gives you progressions and transits and all that stuff as well. So you can study it that way. But it's important to realize that everything is in motion. There's no such thing as a static thing. And it's true too that static picture is your forevermore, what you have and what you have to relate to as well. So both are true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always notice, I try to always notice more personal cycles. Like, how old are you? Are you, coming close to a Saturn return? Are you having
Mm.
that Uranus opposition? Are you getting to that Saturn square? What's going on with that? I think those personal cycles also really jump out. And then, probably the going further with that step is looking at the bigger picture like you are, like where are all the things going, like not just one or two, but how do you mesh all of those things together, which is that just takes years of experience to begin to get all that stuff in there.
Right. That's exactly it. That a lot of what happens, what people will say, how do you balance all these? There's so many points. It's like anyone, if you learn to play chess or something where there are multiple pieces, it takes a while to scan something. You've done it so often, so many times that you know immediately where things are. Like for instance, if in current times, I know where Saturn is right now. I know where Neptune is. I track that because I'm constantly watching. So if I see any chart and I spot, for instance, let's say the person is born with very, very late Sagittarius sun, right? So then you say, well, Neptune is squaring there from the end of Pisces. You just know.
Yeah.
Immediately, that's a data point that you look at and you see them all at once because you're doing it a lot, and if you
Yeah.
have to actually look and measure, it's not going to work. You
Yeah.
might
It's
see something, but
it makes it harder, but also when you have it more on the tip of your brain, your brain is AI. Your brain melds all of that stuff together.
Mhm,
You just
right.
kind of like allow that to kind of flow and you get a better picture.
Mhm.
So when you're reading in whole sign houses for somebody's chart and you're reading a planet that's in not just close to the ascendant, but what about the other houses? So, you know that you're looking at each house as basically starting at zero. So if you have a planet in a house where it's at like say 27, 28, do you still read it in the house and sign that it's in, or do you read it moving into the other house? Does it affect the other house? Because in Placidus, that was always the conundrum. It's really working in the other house.
Right. No, I read it in the sign always, and
Okay.
and especially if the degrees are close to the degrees of the ascendant. So
Uh,
if someone has 25 rising and the planet is at 27, that planet links to the ascendant, so it's especially strong in that sign slash house, like that particular part of the chart. Basically, a lot of this controversy is around counting, like where do you start? And I favor the ascendant, and I remember that I was struck by reading that Ptolemy, who's one of the
mhm.
ancients that brought in the aspects and so forth. He's well known, and back in the day they didn't say third house, they said third sign, fourth sign.
Yeah.
They were counting from the ascendant. So then it's in the Middle Ages that a science comes in, everything became about, well, let's complicate this and make, all fancy kinds of measurements. And I'm not saying that you can't get anything from those systems. For example, I remember coming across something Rob Hand said, that he was studying a woman that was doing the koch system using the cusps, and she was doing some pretty nifty forms of gambling and getting results. And, maybe that's possible. I don't know. But when you're doing the psychology of transits and so forth, I still think, the whole sign system gives you the best answers, the best correlations.
Yeah, I mean, I started out when I was first doing astrology as Placidus, and I have always found it a little tricky. I've always found it a real challenge, and I did not really. I tried a couple of other systems, but they just didn't click either. I had never tried the whole sign system until just a few years ago when I started to do predictive videos for like the full moon or the new moon. You have to use whole sign houses. You're not going to know everybody's ascendant, so you have to use that. And I realized that it just made it so easy.
Well, that too. That's the bonus, you see. But then the thing is that then you get into these literal fights. I don't know if people are aware of this thing where Chris Brennan, he is I think he's in his 40s, maybe late 40s. I'm not sure what his age is. He's definitely younger than me, but he's been doing astrology many years, and he's for the most part, from what I understand, he's into Hellenistic astrology where they use whole sign. And he got into this big row with this woman who was really against the whole sign system, and she was basically poo-pooing it as a kind of amateurish way to do astrology. That is completely untrue, because lots of heavyweights. Rob Hand was one of the people that I remember in the 90s when I started doing this. I remember that I was kind of being drawn that way. And then I saw one of his treatises and I thought, yeah, I think, when someone who's like a dinosaur compared to me, he was doing astrology long before me, he's coming to the same conclusion. Then I remember reading Stephen Arroyo, who was another great astrologer.
Yes,
He was asked, and he didn't say whole sign, but he said, the older I get, the more I'm ascendant based. I keep noticing that the ascendant is what connects everything. So that again told me that I was on the right track. But ultimately, you gotta, part of astrology is to doubt yourself and be open to, at a moment going, oh wow, look at that, Placidus cusp, amazing. Yeah. The problem is that I never have that happen.
Yeah.
Yet, right.
Right. So, I know. I've started doing clients readings using whole sign houses, even though I'm not really very good at it, or I don't know that much about it, but just sort of stumbling my way through it. And I'm actually getting good results. I'm getting really good feedback from clients. They feel like, yeah, you're hitting it. You're getting the things I need to know. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to mention that I'm only.
There you go. Yeah, well, then maybe you're better than you think.
Yeah, right. Maybe there's something going on I don't know. So when you're looking at let's go back to the midheaven. So as you're interpreting the midheaven, like for instance, my midheaven is in the 11th house. And I actually have in the whole sign houses, I have the sun in the 10th house. And I thought, oh, well, that's very good. But the midheaven is in the 11th house. So how do you meld? What do you look at? Do you look at, okay, the 11th house? Am I looking at, traits of Aquarius, or am I looking at what the 11th house is, and that's how the midheaven is expressing? Or how do you kind of interpret that and bring those pieces together?
Well, I mean, I would say first level, before you even talk about whether it's 9, 10, or 11, there are even cases where someone is born, say in Alaska, the midheaven go to the 12th. That's how extreme it is, right?
I would imagine. Yeah.
What you do is you gauge it in transit and try to figure out, okay, well, what's happening here? Compare the planet going through the 10th to the 11th. But I have seen that, say, the 11th and bringing in group energy, and you're concerned with, the 11th meanings, in other words, groups of people, right. Your place in society. The 11th is also income from career, because it's the second from the 10th. So you could look at that as well. But it's all in the as the transits are happening, or the progressions, gauging, okay, what exactly is going on with this thing to really get your answer rather than speculating. And to me, if you do it that way, as time passes, you'll get more and more clarity around the difference, and both are important. So, for instance, I'm not saying the midheaven point should be rejected. In a way, it's like having the midheaven gives you a second uh, pattern or second thing that you're studying that relates to career, just like the 10th does, right?
Yeah,
So
another layer to put
another
on.
layer, yeah, right. And so then when you're doing something like a progression or a so either the progressed midheaven or the progressed ascendant, you track both and you see how they're affecting planets, in those movements. And the thing is, the 10th sign type thing, that'll be an angle to the ascendant anyway. So if you're tracking the ascendant, you get that automatically.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
the midheaven gives you an extra point. And there's truth to the fact that the MC is connected to something important. I just disagree that it should be the 10th house cusp. That's the
yeah,
key pattern, especially when you think that uh, you're looking at all these people are born at the same time as you. You all have the same midheaven, but notice that every person has a different ascendant along that meridian. The ascendant changes, but the midheaven stays the same for every person, right?
right.
So
Oh,
it's
yeah,
it's why
yeah.
yeah.
Wow. Oh, that's really, really interesting. Um, so I have Chris Brennan's book, and it's a very daunting book. It's not one that you just sort of read at night to go to sleep. I mean,
Yeah,
pretty
but
thick,
if you
pretty
want
dry.
to fall asleep frustrated, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I also have Demetra George's tomes, and those are also like the spines have not been cracked because they're just intimidating, just how
Mhm.
big they are. But I do think that his Chris Brennan's approach with Hellenistic astrology is really interesting and really valuable. I mean, he's undoubtedly one of the best researchers around on the
Mhm.
planet. He's just
Right.
hands down. I mean, his footnotes take up more space sometimes on a page than the text. He's incredible, and I really admire his bravery in just like stamping, putting his flag in the ground and saying, "Yes, I'm for Hellenistic astrology, and this is why." These are all these great reasons. I gotta say, I mean, right down to using the classical planets to represent what's going on for the signs. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, his
Mhm.
for transits and stuff. I'm just like, yeah, you got that right. You really have that right. So he's a big proponent of the day chart or the night chart, and he really puts great importance on that. Do you subscribe to that? Do you use that in your interpretations?
Not as much. So this is where you get at with astrologers where they break with each other's.
Hmm.
I'm with them on the whole sign. I'm not with them on day and night or the Hellenistic. So either or, in the sense that there are things about Hellenistic that I like, but there are things that I don't like. I really like geometric astrology. I like the purity of the numbers. There's this guy that David Hamblin. He died recently. He did a lot of work on harmonics, and he says something that is to me really basic. The very first thing you look at is planets relating to each other in some number. Before you start putting a zodiac in there, the zodiac is man-made, right? You stick in, you say, okay, Aries, Taurus, this kind of thing. But before you get there, planets are where they are, and they talk to each other through a number, which could be opposition is 2, conjunction is 1, square is 4, but you can also have 5, 7, 9. You can have all kinds of numbers, right?
Yeah.
So this guy uh, talked about this, and so um, to me, that's the first layer. And in Hellenistic astrology, they bring in quite often they'll bring in groupings that you look at them and you think, okay, who made this up? Like in some sign, it'll say, well, this part from here to here is Mars. This part from here to here. I don't have a solid grip on why anybody why is that? Why is it that in other words, it's not you're not doing a division by 9 or by 7 like in the 7th harmonic or the 9th harmonic. You're simply deciding this grouping here goes like this and this goes like that. I get suspicious right away of that. The same with day and night. They'll say different part of fortune, things like that. I haven't seen enough to convince me to to use it differently. To me, why should it be that so night all of a sudden is more moon, day is more sun?
Yeah.
But like why? I know the moon is supposed to be there at night. What if it's not there, for example? What if the moon isn't even seen in the person's chart because it only shows up during the day? There are too many questions. Unless someone shows me a really clear case where they can say, look, here it is. This proves that it works. I'm inclined to be skeptical of that. And remember that with astrology, astrology is so rich that you can do really well with what, say, I might think, okay, well, Placidus, I'm not going to use that. But I know Stephen Forrest uses Placidus. He's a great astrologer.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get really good astrology. There's so much energy there, so many aspects that you can always get to important points, right?
Yeah.
But to my understanding, some things are, let's just say, more clear than others. And so Hellenistic, for example, I'll give you an example, and I'll ask you how you feel about this, right? I am with Hellenistic astrology and with Chris Brennan in that Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius. But then they'll tell you Uranus has nothing to do with Aquarius. I think it does. You know why? Because I've seen it in my chart show up and I'll go, that's pretty weird. It's pointing to the house that it rules.
Mm-hmm.
I see this a lot. And I sometimes will be looking at a crime or something and I'll see the Neptune connected to Pisces. Even though Jupiter is the first ruler, Neptune assists, or Pluto to Scorpio. But they will say no. They go along with the Vedics in that respect, where in Vedic, they reject
Planets. Yeah.
the roles. And so if my experience is telling me something different, I'll go with my experience. And so, but again, am I saying that makes them bad astrologers? No, these people are great astrologers. And the other thing that can happen is you talk to me, I'll say certain things. You talk to Rob Hand, Chris Brennan, easily will say something that I missed or that he has an insight into, so that's the other side of this as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think otherwise I would not have any success at all because I only know about, this much of, and I've studied for years, but, life, I haven't done it continuously for years, but I do have pretty deep experience in astrology. But when I was learning astrology, I only went as far as learning, I learned how to throw a natal chart. I learned how to look at transits. I learned how to look at progressions and the aspects and everything. And I could decipher a natal chart, right? So I did pretty well with that. Over the years, as things grew, all these different techniques came to light, came to my attention, and I got a little flummoxed. I was like, good Lord, now do I have to learn all this stuff? I was doing just fine with this other stuff. I did learn more things, but it's like medicine. It's like there's always something else to learn. There's always some other place to go with it. And that's part of what keeps me fascinated about astrology, but also intimidated by astrology. There's a lot there. There's just so much there.
There is. It's true. I mean, this is the thing, and the thing is the art of figuring out. I mean, there's a science in that you're measuring and counting, but going to the important part of something, and this is again where I can digress, not so much from Hellenistic, but what I'll notice is that you go on Google, type something, and you see things like some point. Like the other day, I found this thing called an asteroid called Angel, and it's not easy to find because even Solar Fire, I don't think, has it in there, but it's around. You can find it at Astrodienst. And then so I thought, what is this angel thing? And there were people saying this angel has to do with your guides and something that gives you. But then I thought, hold on. Before you get to angel, the first layer of guides would be something like Jupiter, being the biggest planet, co-ruler of Pisces. So I'm not too keen on saying the explanation from my whatever is Chiron or a small asteroid. I always go from the top down, just because the transits are bigger and the impact is much bigger.
Exactly. The whole thing is bigger. When you get to the asteroids, also their orbits are, they're going to influence you, but their orbits are so weird. so many of them, their orbits, they're like retrograde for most of the year, and they're going in between because they're in that Kuiper belt. So they're going in between other planets. And so they're going to have an impact. But I don't know. I haven't studied their orbits or their cycles enough to really know where they go. But I do think that they're kind of, to me, it's like sprinkling nuts on the sundae. It's like, yeah, you could have the sundae without it. You could,
Right, 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 right.
there without it, it would be okay. And
Yeah.
now you're talking about numbers, and have you ever heard of? Excuse me, I just have to grab this guy's book because this guy has passed away, but he was an amazing astrologer. So I just have to grab his book. Oh, here it is. The degrees theory. Okay. I'm gonna butcher his name. It's Nikola Stojanovic or Stoyanovich. He was, I think, in I want to say Hungary. Not 100% sure. So I saw him do a couple of videos with Astrolata. Are you familiar with her work at all?
Doesn't come to mind. Astrolata?
Yeah. So Lada is really her name, and she has sort of an astrology empire now. She started out just doing these very fascinating astrology videos. She's very excited. A lot of combo of Aries and Aquarian energy. A lot of very amazing things. So she started this really literally an empire. She started going out and finding other astrologers, and because I think she's from Hungary as well. So she's very connected to astrologers in Europe, a lot more so, well, for a while, more so than in the United States. So she has put all of these astrologers on a website, and you can it's like a Chinese food menu. Like you can pick one from column A and I've gotten some great readings from these people. I mean, these are phenomenal astrologers. And one of them is Nikolai, and he has this theory that he developed. He calls it the degrees theory. And he had very good results taking the degree of not only your descendant, and I think he might have been using Placidus houses, I'm not sure. She uses whole sign houses, so he's probably whole sign house. But he would take the degree of either the ruler of your seventh house or a planet in your seventh house, and he could predict by that degree what your potential first marriage partner, how you would meet them, and what they did for a living by the degree.
Wow.
And he was very accurate. And I'm like, are you kidding me? It was crazy. It was crazy because, I mean, there's only 360 degrees, right? So you got...
And this is like you're saying, you said that predict which the first marriage? Is that what you said?
Yeah, for the first partner, because that's what he's going by, the seventh house. And then I guess he would go to the ninth house for the second partner or something. I don't know. So, but it was really like he used this method for a couple of other predictive areas in the chart as well. But he went by the exact, what was the degree? And I thought it was fascinating. I wonder if it's at all connected to what you're talking about, the numbers that you're talking about. I don't think so. It sounds like you're
No, it's a little different. Like because the idea with numbers is when you say degrees of a planet, that's just a way to give it a number so you can see where it is in the sign, by like, is it at the beginning? Is it in the middle, 15? Is it, like that? But the numbers I'm talking about is, if let's say the planet is at 1 degree, what's relevant to me is I look for other planets at 1 degree and other signs to establish how they talk to each other. So the numbers that I'm referring to are relationships between planets in the harmonic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all these numbers. So, for example, to give an example, the fifth harmonic is you're cutting the circle in 5 pieces.
Yeah.
And you notice that Hitler had a massive fifth harmonic in his chart, a big pentagram. But the pentagram being what it is, it's a dangerous, very creative, but also potentially very destructive as well. You get both of those. So, and in a way, his creation was destroying, to be blunt about it, right?
Yeah.
And the other person that has a lot of fifth harmonic is Trump. And you don't see this right away, but if you notice that he's got, because you only see the squares and the regular ones, but if you notice that the fifth is this penchant for imposing your order on the world, imposing your particular vision, which is what Trump is constantly doing.
Mhm.
You see those reflections, but they're numbers in the way the planets talk to each other, not because they have a specific number in the sign. That's just to
Right,
place it in that spot. So
right.
this is why I personally would be a little suspicious if someone said, "Well, your planet is going to indicate that." But if someone shows me, with all of this, it's like I have two sisters that are both astrologers, and I always say to them, "Just show me the technique. If it works, I'll use it. But don't give me a technique and pretend that it works without any evidence. Then I'm not going to."
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, his work is really, really interesting, but kind of controversial. So, I don't know. I certainly have not mastered it.
Yeah, and the other thing is that if you're drawn, this is what makes it really rich. If you're drawn to something, it's like why I'm not going to say to look all the asteroid thing, don't bother with that. No, not necessarily. There may be an astrologer, in fact, there probably is, that is studying that angel asteroid, or there's a guy I get some astrologer that sends me these emails. All he uses is asteroids, and he has an asteroid for everything, all kinds of names for, you wouldn't believe it. There are thousands of asteroids. So odds are he'll discover something that I'm not going to discover. So everyone is adding something to the lexicon,
Mhm.
and it could be that that's your role, and maybe you discover asteroid Colleen is,
Yeah,
and it turns out to be super meaningful. Sure,
yeah. Well,
that's
like some people use the Sabian symbols, they find great value and great,
yeah,
I
it's
don't know,
true. It's true.
articulation
Yeah,
of that. And
I've used those to the Sabian symbols to try to. I know my birth time within a minute or two, but when I'm comparing, if it flips to the one that makes less sense to me, I'll consider the Sabian symbol that yes, that is more seems
Mhm.
more accurate based on my temperament and yet. One of my sisters says, I can't get anything out of that. That Sabian symbol, nothing. It doesn't mean
Yeah,
anything to me.
different strokes for different folks. And,
Right.
and as astrologers, we are all working with what we're given, we're all working with our planets. So if it doesn't resonate with us, then obviously we're not going to use it. you know,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's right.
exactly.
So somebody in the chat corrected me that Nikolai was from Serbia, and I knew that he had passed away. And Astrolata or Lada, and I can't remember her last name. She's Bulgarian. She's from Bulgaria.
Hmm.
Bulgaria?
Bulgaria.
Bulgaria. Does
Yeah.
that country still exist?
Yeah,
Does it? Oh
for
boy.
sure. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
European map has just changed so much. I have no idea. Oh boy. Well, that is it for my questions. So, is there anything else you want to add about whole sign houses?
Well, I think I would reemphasize what you said earlier, even though it may seem like that would be the least powerful point to make around it. The fact that it's the simplest system to use, so that when you look at a chart, as soon as you know the ascendant, you can know what the other houses in quotes or the other signs where they fall into that order, and it'll make it a lot easier for you to assess things that way. When you look at a chart, just count and get really good at saying, okay, if Leo rises, Cancer is going to be 12, Virgo is going to be house number 2, and just train yourself to do that, because that's part of, I think, really learning astrology is instantly recognizing, the planet, the signs that are square, the signs that are trine, or the signs
Yeah.
that are doing whatever angle. And don't forget one that an aspect that I studied a lot in these last few years because it was really affecting me, and it ended up affecting me both ironically in learning about it because I was experiencing it. So I was learning the astrology, but also through the events that took place. But the 150, which is when you start from Aries, Scorpio, and Virgo are the health and death signs. So
Mhm.
that aspect tends to correlate a lot to health and things like surgeries, injuries, and potentially even death, whether it's you, hopefully not, or or someone around you. But it's a very important aspect. And one that if you don't train yourself to look at the numbers, because you're used to, for instance, if you know that a planet is in Gemini, opposite is Sagittarius, square uh, is Virgo, and so on. So you won't even see that you've got a 150, and they're super important uh, with a lot of these major events. You almost always will see it at least one, and sometimes more than one. But
Yeah.
again, that's based on the numbers, just so that you can line things up, right, and connect them. Or you then can go into, well, for instance, you can have signs that are 150 to each other, like say Taurus and Libra. Again, see, there's so many layers, right? And I know that this drives people crazy. It's why they give up on astrology, because
Hmm.
they think, I just can't make any sense of it. There's too much. The only thing I can say about that is keep it simple at first. Using whole sign will make it simpler, and focus on the big energies first, like Saturn and Jupiter, for example. Uh, where are they? What are they doing? I notice, I don't know if you've noticed this in your practice, that wherever Saturn is transiting, those that those four signs, like right now it's Pisces, I see more Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces, because they feel the pressure of Saturn. So then they check, well, I wonder what's going on. Why is it hard? They want to ask the astrologer why. Then when it goes into Aries, which it'll be next, then it'll be the cardinal signs: Aries, Libra, Capricorn, and Cancer. They're the ones that have the questions, right?
Yeah, I do
So,
notice that. I notice that a lot. And it's interesting. People are just like, "How did you know that?" Like, well, because it's a cycle. Everything fits in the circle, and they all have mathematical relationships to each other. It's just that's the way it goes. Um,
yeah. And by the way, I was saying this in my class earlier today, that you can experience, suppose you're a Pisces right now, Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius. That's the quadruplicity that Saturn is working on. And the irony is that goes through there, you do grow. So when you look back, you realize, oh yeah, that was important. I was doing these things, and now I'm doing better. But when you're in it, usually you're not nearly as happy. And especially when the planet is really tight close, Saturn will always give you a hard time. When it's really close, yeah, don't lie when someone asks you, so, oh yeah, I'm doing really well. No, you're not. Because I try every single time to get around it. I just
yeah,
had an experience of it, and it's
yeah,
uncomfortable, and it's almost like it teaches you through discomfort, rather than Jupiter. Whoa, everything is great, happy,
yeah.
type
But
thing.
I always tell my clients, but Saturn will leave you a gift when it's done.
Sure. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just have to
Wisdom.
turn around and recognize it, because if you don't, you're going to have to do it again. So,
Yeah, and the thing is, those tend to be, broader. Like, for example, you look back a year after the pressure of the square. If you look at the whole sign, it's a couple of years, and you just realize, yeah, I was in this thing, that was putting pressure on me, but uh, I was able to make a move. Like, I'll give you an example. Uh, Many years ago, I was under the false impression that if someone had Saturn in sextile or trine to their planets, they would say to me, I don't like my job. I want to leave my job. And I would say, well, look, it's Saturn is trine, Saturn is sextile. It's helping you make a move. They wouldn't make the move until it was square or opposed.
huh,
They needed the pressure of the planet to actually move. So, but of course, you realize if you're going to move, usually that's uncomfortable because you're not sure. There's a new job. When do I tell them I'm leaving? The whole thing has this transitional, uncomfortable feeling about it. But then you get to the new job and you realize, yes, this is better. I'm glad that I left that other place. So that's how squares can work. And so both are true at the same time, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But people very often are just reluctant to change in general, any change,
Right, right.
very, very reluctant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just realized that, yeah, Saturn has been sitting on top of my Mars the whole time. Well, not the whole time, but for these last few weeks. And
Where
I'm
is your Mars? Is your Mars in Pisces?
Yeah, my Mars is in Pisces, but I'm trying to make sense out of what's going on. I'm going through a lot of health changes and really looking at my health and going to the doctor for the first time in like 15 years, and that's part of that's almost a Saturn cycle. It's like,
What was your what
I'm
was your
like
rising? I can't
Capricorn,
remember.
Capricorn,
Capricorn
right?
rising.
Yeah,
So that's
like
Cancer, Gemini,
yeah, 11
Sagittarius.
degrees Capricorn. My Mars is at 13 degrees of Pisces, so Saturn's just over it now, I think.
Yeah, it's past that. It's left it. That was more early April.
Yep, and that's
Uh,
when I started doing everything. Yeah, I started
yeah,
actually mid-March, and for the whole Mercury retrograde, I was going to doctor's appointments and getting tests done and doing all sorts of stuff. I figured, yeah, I can't do computer stuff because it's Mercury retrograde, but I sure did a lot of health stuff.
are,
It
are
went
your
great.
are your Mercury and Jupiter implicated by degree? Where are they?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. The Jupiter is opposite my Mars, so it's opposite Saturn, and Mercury is a little behind it. So Saturn's going to be hitting my Mercury soon. Oh yeah, and that's my health house. Okay,
Yeah,
so
that's
that
the
makes
health
sense.
house. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
why the two health houses. So then the Mars gets drawn in, but the other two are often drawn in whenever Saturn's giving you a hard time. You also see this in I'm remembering now those degrees. That's when Jack Smith ran into Eileen Cannon's obvious. Um, she's trying to delay the trial, and so by what she's doing, she's pretty much guaranteeing that there won't be a documents trial until after the election. And I remember that Saturn was squaring him, and also that's when the Supreme Court made a ruling that looked like they were also helping Trump out. So you see that in public figures where if you see a Saturn situation, they tend to get stopped or pushed back or held back. Whereas when they have Jupiter, they tend to get wins or
sure.
successful points for
Yeah.
the most part.
And two things have happened that I think that now. So you think with that Saturn that happened last month, right? Or-
Yes, for
So
you.
now Saturn coming forward a little later in Pisces, we have Eileen Cannon with some disturbing charges levied against her. I can't remember exactly what they were, but they're not good for a judge. Favoritism, basically. Oh,
Really?
not declaring a big, huge gift that she was given. She was treated to some sort of luxury getaway, and
Is
she
that
didn't.
right?
Yeah, and she didn't claim it. And then also that Jack Smith, they're saying that Jack Smith is going to be bringing up a new superseding indictment about the documents case, which could be heard in a different venue. It could be heard in New Jersey or Washington D.C. or something else. So that Saturn is really moving things around for Jack Smith. It's really
Yeah.
doing some
Well,
stuff.
and remember, he's a Gemini, so he's going to
Yep,
get the Jupiter as we go into the summer, right? So
right,
there's all
right.
of
Well,
that.
it's
And
not May. Jupiter's changing signs. So yeah.
yeah, so then, but when it gets to I think he's around 14 degrees. When Saturn is near 14, that's a square, that's hard. When
Mhm.
Jupiter's at 14, that's a more positive thing. In yours, you have
Yeah.
to realize that 13, Saturn's going to go back there at the end of the year.
Mhm.
So, it's always important when you're going toward and it's coming, do as much as you can to prepare. So the way that I prepare for Saturn transits is I bring in a lot of Jupiter through the agency of Saturn, through my visualizing, through my connecting with my most balanced, peaceful nature, because that tends to, I think, I mean, maybe I'm imagining it, but it feels like it's protecting me from the really tough Saturn, uh, energies, which the worst can be with Saturn. The absolute worst is when you get a Saturn cycle and through lack of skill, you hurt your body energy. So you feel awful. Either you're really sick or you're just not feeling well. And then it ruins the whole period. Plus, it can attract bad things to you. So you have to be careful, right? That's where don't blame the astrology, blame your lack of skill,
Yeah,
so to
right.
speak. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, I didn't really plan this out astrologically. I was just sort of caving into pressure from my two daughters to get to the doctor. And I was like, oh God, I just don't want to do this. But I did it. I was like, you know what? This is probably something I should really do. So I feel like I did get ahead of it. And it is something that I'm going to have to really make changes in order to promote a much healthier lifestyle. Because I plan on living till I'm 130 years old, Andre. I don't want to have a body that doesn't function. I want to be able to walk around and dance. I don't want,
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't,
I mean, it's the irony of astrology, though, that the planet that gives you the hardest time is also Saturn. It's pretty much the only planet when people make serious moves to correct something because Saturn implies a sacrifice, giving up something,
Mhm.
doing something you'd probably rather not do. And yet it's the planet you need. to get you
Yes.
there. So it has that quality, right?
Yeah.
It's
Well,
ironic,
Capricorn rising. I've made friends with Saturn a long time ago.
right? Right.
But well, we've been on for not quite an hour, but it's been a very, very interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining me for this,
Oh,
and
it's a
thank
pleasure.
you so much for sharing your knowledge. I just really appreciate that.
It's a pleasure. It's a
It's
pleasure.
really, really fun. It's great. So I hope you'll come back, and I'll think up some other goofy topic to talk about. Who knows? Maybe I'll actually read Nikolai Stojanovich's book, and we can talk about that.
Yeah, if you find a case study of some kind that you see, correlates to a technique or something, that can be fun. If you say, well, look, this thing happened in this way. I mean, the way you do that though is that, let's say you said, okay, look, this planet is at this degree using Nikolai's method. This happened and this correlates with whatever. Then you also look at, are there other ways to explain it? Are there other patterns? And because then you have to ask yourself, if you can explain it through some other transit, then you ask, well, would it have happened anyway? Or does the Nikolai's technique add to it? They're just interesting discussions around that.
Yeah. And I'm doing a lot of that because I'm looking at my chart through whole sign houses now. My whole life, I was thinking of myself in a certain way with the planets in certain houses. And now a lot of my planets are in different houses. And I'm just like, oh my God, where's my identity? So it's been, I'm really looking at all those things all the time. It's really interesting. But I thank you so much for your time. I know you're super busy, and I really appreciate you coming on. And everybody in the chat was very excited to see you too. And I'm sure people had questions. Everybody in the chat, I am just completely atrocious at addressing questions in the chat. So I don't make any excuses. I just say, yes, I'm terrible. And I'm so sorry we didn't get to them, but thank you for coming in. I really appreciate it. And Andre, until we meet again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.